December 17th, 1944, 0800 hours, Camp Concordia, Kansas. The mess hall door swings open. Steam billows into air so cold it turns breath to fog before you can speak. Inside, 216 German POWs, Fallschirmjäger from the 5th Parachute Division, captured 3 weeks ago in the Hurtgen forest, stand in formation, watching. They've been told they'll eat 3 meals today. Not 1. 3. Oberleutnant Friedrich Seidl, 31 years old, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, stands at the front of the line. His uniform is American issue now, dyed blue with PW, stenciled across the back. He weighs 138 pounds. When he was captured, he weighed 167. He doesn't believe what he's seeing. None of them do. Because for 18 months, Reich Ministry of Propaganda broadcasts told them American soldiers were starving. That America's mongrel population was too weak, too decadent to sustain a war economy. That by 1944, the average GI was subsisting on hardtack and whatever he could steal from French peasants. Seidl is about to learn what happens when ideology collides with industrial abundance. The cognitive dissonance will be so severe, so complete, that some men will refuse to eat for 3 days. Others will eat until they vomit, and a few, a very specific few, will experience something close to religious conversion. This is the story of that collision. Friedrich Seidl was born in Würzburg, 1913, son of a postal clerk. Before the war, he taught mathematics at a gymnasium, secondary school for university-bound students. He loved Euclid, the elegance of proof, the way logic built upon itself, creating structures of perfect clarity. He joined the Fallschirmjäger in 1940 because the recruiting poster showed paratroopers descending over Crete. And the geometry of their descent patterns, the precise spacing, the mathematical beauty of coordinated mass, appealed to something fundamental in him. By 1944, he commanded a company reduced to 47 men. They fought in Normandy, pulled back through Belgium, held a forest position in the Hurtgen until American artillery turned the trees into splinters and the splinters into shrapnel. When he surrendered, he was carrying a Walter P-38, 3 rounds remaining, and a photograph of his wife Hannah, holding their daughter Greta. The photograph was the only thing the Americans let him keep. He'd eaten 1 meal a day for the past 6 months, sometimes less. The Wehrmacht logistics system in the West had collapsed. Rations came irregularly. What arrived was often spoiled. He'd watched men trade cigarettes for single potatoes, seen soldiers with doctorates foraging for roots. And through it all, Radio Berlin assured them the Americans had it worse. The strategic situation in December 1944 was this. America held 425,000 Axis POWs, scattered across 501 camps from Georgia to Montana. This represented the largest enemy prisoner population in US history, and they had to be fed, housed, and processed according to the Geneva Convention requirements that the United States, unlike its enemies, actually followed. The Geneva Convention was explicit. POWs would receive rations equivalent to those of the captor nation's depot troops. Not frontline soldiers. Depot troops, the baseline. For America in 1944, that baseline was staggering. The US Ponder Army's daily ration allocation for depot troops was 4,758 calories. This included fresh meat, fresh vegetables, dairy, bread, coffee with real sugar, and dessert. The German frontline soldiers' official ration, when it arrived, was 2,300 calories. By late 1944, the actual delivered ration averaged 1,500 calories. But here's what created the psychological crisis at Camp Concordia. The German prisoners had been fed Navy doctrine during the Atlantic crossing. Shipboard rations, 3 hot meals daily, fresh eggs, meat at every meal. They'd assumed this was special treatment, a propaganda exercise perhaps, or a way to soften them for interrogation. Then they arrived at Concordia, a small camp in central Kansas. Nothing special, no propaganda value, just one of dozens of branch camps scattered across wheat country, and the food kept coming. Breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, hash browns, white bread, butter, coffee with sugar and cream, orange juice, Lunch, beef stew, cornbread, coleslaw, apple pie. Dinner, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, milk, cake, every single day. The Wehrmacht officers began holding secret meetings. They developed theories. This was psychological warfare, they decided. The Americans were fattening them up to make them soft, destroying their military discipline. Or it was a temporary abundance. Surely the food would be reduced to normal levels once they were processed. Seidl, the mathematician, did calculations. He estimated the caloric content of each meal, calculated the logistics required to sustain this level of provision for 425,000 prisoners across an entire continent. The numbers didn't work. They couldn't work. No military in history had ever maintained such abundance. Therefore, he concluded, this couldn't be real, or it couldn't last. He was wrong about both. December 20th, 1944. 3 days after their arrival. Seidl sits in the POW barracks, a winterized structure with a coal stove, far warmer than any Wehrmacht barracks he'd occupied in the past year, and watches a new prisoner arrive. Hauptmann Klaus Reinhardt, captured 4 days ago during the opening phase of the Ardennes offensive. He still has color in his face. His uniform, though American-dyed, is relatively new. He carries himself with the rigid certainty of a man whose ideology hasn't been tested by prolonged reality. They're lying to you, Reinhardt announces within his first hour. This abundance is false. They're using cinema tricks, making the same food appear multiple times. Or this camp is special, a showcase for Red Cross inspections. Seidl says nothing. He's been watching the American guards. Specifically, he's been watching them eat. The American guards eat in their own mess hall, visible through windows from the POW compound. And they eat the same food. Exactly the same. Not better rations. Not different preparation. Identical meals. This is what breaks Seidl's denial. Because if the Americans are feeding their guards the same rations they feed prisoners, then this isn't psychological warfare. This isn't temporary. This is just normal. This is how Americans eat. He makes a decision. He will observe, systematically, with mathematical precision. He begins counting calories, recording meal components, noting preparation methods. He recruits other men, engineers mostly, men trained to observe and quantify. They create a secret log hidden beneath a floorboard. The American camp administration never notices. Why would they? The prisoners are just eating. But Seidl is building a proof, a mathematical demonstration that will destroy everything they believed about the war. The data accumulates. Week 1, average daily calorie count 4,650. Protein sources, beef, chicken, pork, eggs, milk, cheese. Vegetable variety, 13 types observed. Bread, white, fresh, unlimited. Dessert, present at 83% of meals. Week 2, pattern holds. Christmas Day brings turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, 3 types of pie. The German prisoners sit in stunned silence. Some weep. Hauptmann Reinhardt refuses to eat, insisting it's a trick. He loses 12 pounds in 5 days before the camp doctor forces him to accept food. Week 3, a Red Cross inspection. The prisoners are interviewed. Seidl, speaking carefully in his formal English, asked the inspector, "Is this food allocation normal for American camps?" The inspector, a Swiss national, neutral, no reason to lie, looks confused by the question. Of course, standard rations per Geneva Convention. Some camps have better cooks than others, but the allocation is standard. Seidl feels something crack inside his chest, not his ribs, something deeper. He returns to the barracks and retrieves his secret log. That evening, he calls together the remaining officers from his regiment. 14 men, veterans of Crete, Russia, Normandy. He presents his findings. In 3 weeks, we have consumed more protein than we received in 6 months on the Western Front. The Americans feed us better than the Wehrmacht fed its panzer crews, better than they fed us in 1940 at the height of German power, and they do this for 425,000 prisoners, while feeding a 12 million-man military, while supplying Britain and the Soviet Union, while maintaining civilian rations at home higher than any nation in Europe. Silence. Then Oberfeldwebel Hans Kramer, 40 years old, veteran of Poland, France, Russia, North Africa, speaks, "The war is lost. Not, we might lose. Not, things look difficult. The war is lost. It was always lost. We were fighting a nation we didn't understand. We thought they were weak because they were comfortable. We didn't realize they're comfortable because they're strong." This is the moment of true capture, not when they dropped their weapons in the Hürtgen forest, not when they crossed the Atlantic in Liberty ship holds. Here, now, when they understood the scope of their miscalculation. January 8, 1945. Morning formation. Hauptmann Reinhardt has finally accepted that the food is real. But he's developed a new theory. The abundance is America's weakness. They're decadent, he tells Seidl. They lack hardness. They can't sustain hardship. When this war turns against them, and it will, they'll collapse. Seidl is about to respond when a commotion erupts at the mess hall entrance. A young American private, maybe 19, pink-faced, from somewhere in Minnesota or Wisconsin, has dropped a tray. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and hash browns splatter across the wooden floor. The mess hall is packed. 216 German POWs, 40 American guards, civilian kitchen staff. The private stares at the ruined food. His face reddens. He looks like he might cry. Then the head cook, a black sergeant from Alabama named William Jefferson, who runs the kitchen with professional precision, emerges from behind the serving line. "Son, you pick up that mess, then you come back here and I'll fix you another plate." The private blinks. Another whole plate, Sergeant?" Jefferson looks at him like he's simple. "Boy, you think I'm going to send you to work hungry because you slipped on a wet floor? Get yourself cleaned up." It takes 3 minutes. Jefferson prepares a fresh, full breakfast, hands it over, pats the private on the shoulder. The German prisoners have watched this entire exchange in absolute silence, because they've just witnessed something impossible. A sergeant voluntarily giving additional food to a clumsy private who destroyed the first portion, not punishing him, not reducing his rations, replacing the loss without hesitation or paperwork. This is the abundance that breaks them, not the big picture, not the statistics. This, a dropped breakfast, replaced without thought, because in America, food isn't scarce enough to warrant cruelty. Reinhardt stops talking about American weakness after that. The records exist. Wehrmacht intelligence reports, captured and translated, now stored in the National Archives. Wehrwirtschaftsstab report, 12th February 1945. Prisoner repatriation interviews indicate severe morale crisis among POWs held in American camps. Primary complaint, not mistreatment, but excessive comfort. Prisoners report 3 meals daily, including meat, fresh vegetables, dairy products, and desserts. Medical examinations show average weight gain of 15 to 20 pounds within first 2 months of captivity. Critical concern. Returning prisoners display marked reluctance to discuss American industrial capacity. When pressed, subjects become withdrawn or hostile. Several repatriated officers have requested transfer to non-combat duties, citing re-evaluation of strategic situation. Assessment. American POW treatment represents sophisticated psychological warfare. By demonstrating material abundance, enemy undermines German morale and ideological commitment. Recommend increased counter-propaganda, emphasizing spiritual superiority over material decadence. But here's what the Wehrmacht intelligence analysts missed. It wasn't psychological warfare. The Americans weren't trying to demoralize German prisoners. They were just feeding them, following the Geneva Convention, operating within their normal logistical framework. The psychological warfare was accidental, a byproduct of operating in a different material reality. Colonel Heinrich Voigt, former intelligence officer with the 352nd Infantry Division, captured in Normandy and held at Camp Stark, New Hampshire, wrote in his diary, "Seized by camp censors and preserved, January 22nd, 1945. I have concluded that we lost the war in 1941, the moment we declared war on the Americans, not because of their military skill, though they learn quickly, but because they operate from assumptions we cannot match. They assume abundance. They build systems presuming surplus. When a truck breaks down, they abandon it and request another. When rations are delayed, they open emergency stores without panic. They waste, my God, how they waste, because they can afford to. We built our military on scarcity logic, maximize efficiency, tolerate no loss. It made us sharp, hard, effective. But we forgot. Scarcity logic fails when your opponent has abundance logic and the industrial base to support it. I watched a Negro sergeant throw away half a pot of coffee yesterday because it had sat too long and wasn't hot enough. He just threw it away, made a fresh pot. This would be a court-martial offence in the Wehrmacht, but that's the point. They can afford the court-martial offence, and we can't. The psychological crisis spreads. By February 1945, American camp administrators begin reporting unusual patterns. German POWs aren't causing discipline problems, they're causing the opposite. They're too cooperative, too willing to work in labor details, too quick to learn English. At Camp Concordia, Seidl volunteers for the camp library. He begins reading American newspapers, the Concordia Blade Empire, the Kansas City Star. He reads about production numbers, Liberty ships, 2,710 built, Sherman tanks, 49 to 234 manufactured, B-17 bombers, 12,731 produced. He shows the numbers to other officers. These are propaganda figures, one insists. Impossible production rates. But Seidl has been doing the math. If they can feed 425,000 prisoners this well, consistently, for months, why would they lie about production? The question hangs in the cold Kansas air. In March, the camp receives new prisoners from the Ruhr pocket. They arrive skeletal, hollow-eyed, suffering from malnutrition and pneumonia. The camp medical officer, an American captain from Philadelphia named Robert Greenwald, treats them with sulfur drugs, vitamin supplements, and graduated refeeding protocols to prevent refeeding syndrome. The new arrivals gain weight. Color returns to their faces. The older prisoners watch this and understand. The Americans are healing their enemies, not for propaganda, not for strategic value, because the Geneva Convention says they should, and America has the resources to do it. Hauptmann Werner Stolz, former company commander in the 275th Infantry Division, writes to his wife. The letter intercepted by camp censors, translated, filed, Liebste Margarete, I do not know how to tell you what I've learned here. Not about American cruelty. They are not cruel. About American power. It is not the power of tanks or planes. Though they have these in unimaginable numbers, it is the power of not needing to be cruel. They guard us with bored teenagers who would rather be home. They feed us from a logistics system so vast that our rations are a rounding error. When we are sick, they heal us with medicines we've never seen. Drugs so effective that pneumonia, which killed thousands in the East, is cured in a week. I think of the things we did, the things we believed necessary, the hardness we cultivated, the cruelty we justified as strength. And I wonder, what if hardness was just poverty? What if cruelty was just scarcity? What if we weren't strong at all, just desperate men pretending desperation was virtue? The letter never reaches Margaret. Germany's postal system has collapsed, but it remains in the file, archived, preserved. April 12, 1945. President Roosevelt dies. The camp receives the news by radio. The German prisoners expect celebration from the American guards. Roosevelt was the enemy. His death should bring joy. Instead, the guards are somber, quiet. Some are visibly upset. The camp commander, a lieutenant colonel named James Morrison, former insurance adjuster from Ohio, lowers the flag to half-mast. That evening, Morrison addresses the prisoners through an interpreter. President Roosevelt has died. We grieve as a nation. Work details are cancelled tomorrow. The camp will observe a day of mourning. The prisoners are confined to barracks. But through windows, they watch the American guards, see them processing their grief, carrying on with duties despite personal loss. And they think, we fought men who mourn their fallen leaders, who lower flags, who suspend prisoner labor out of respect for their own dead. We called them decadent. Seidl sits in the barracks that night, unable to sleep. He thinks about the mathematics of everything he's witnessed, the caloric calculations, the industrial output, the logistical precision required to feed, clothe, and house hundreds of thousands of prisoners while projecting military power across 2 oceans. He thinks about his daughter Greta, 4 years old when he last saw her, probably hungry now, in a Germany being bombed to rubble. He thinks about the breakfast that was dropped and replaced without punishment. And he understands. They didn't fight a war. They fought a worldview, and the worldview had better logistics. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders. Camp Concordia receives the news. No celebration, just quiet acknowledgement. The war is over. They lost. The prisoners face a new uncertainty, repatriation, return to a Germany that no longer exists in the form they left. Cities in ruins, infrastructure destroyed, economy collapsed. Seidl is repatriated in November 1945. He returns to Würzburg. The city is 90% destroyed. The gymnasium where he taught is rubble. His apartment building survived, but the building next to it is gone. Just a crater filled with water. Hannah and Greta are alive, living with Hannah's parents in a village outside the city. They've survived on rations from the Allied occupation forces, British and American. Not generous, but adequate. No one is starving. When Seidl reunites with his family, Greta doesn't recognize him. He's gained 40 pounds since capture. She's seen photographs, but the man in her memory was gaunt, exhausted, wearing Feldgrau. This man is healthy, well-fed, wearing civilian clothes donated by the American Red Cross. Hannah embraces him, and he feels her ribs through her dress. She weighs perhaps 90 pounds. That night, he tells her about Kansas, about the 3 meals, the dropped breakfast, the coffee thrown away because it wasn't hot enough. She listens in silence. Then, "Tell me you're exaggerating." "I kept records, mathematical logs. I have them in my suitcase. Caloric calculations, protein measurements, it's all documented." "Friedrich, if what you're saying is true, if they could do that for prisoners, what could they have done to us if we'd won?" He has no answer to that. Neither does history. Seidl returns to teaching in 1948. West Germany, now. American occupation zone. He teaches mathematics at a reconstructed gymnasium in Würzburg. He never speaks publicly about his time as a POW, but his students notice something. He has a peculiar habit. When discussing statistical analysis or large-scale systems, he uses examples from logistics, freight tonnage, agricultural output, industrial production. One student years later recalls, "He taught us to respect systems that work, not dramatic systems, not elegant systems, systems that function at scale." He said the most dangerous thing in the world was underestimating boring competence. In 1962, Seidl is interviewed for a West German documentary about POW experiences. The interviewer asks about mistreatment. "There was no mistreatment," Seidl says. "That was the problem." The interviewer doesn't understand. Problem. "We expected cruelty. We'd been told Americans were barbaric, weak, controlled by mongrel races. Instead, we found boring efficiency, good food, medical care, guards who just wanted to go home. It destroyed every assumption we'd used to justify the war." "Did it change your beliefs?" Seidl is quiet for a long moment. "I learned that ideology is expensive, and when you're fighting someone who can afford to be humane, you've already lost." The interview never airs, too ambiguous for the Cold War narrative West Germany is building. But the transcript survives in archives. The final accounting. Between 1942 and 1945, the United States held 425,171 Axis POWs. Of these, 2,222 died in custody, 0.52% mortality rate. This included accidents, illness, and escape attempts. By comparison, 27% of Allied POWs died in German custody. 37% in Japanese custody. The US spent $1.9 billion feeding, housing, and guarding Axis prisoners, roughly $35 billion in 2024 dollars. This represented 0.6% of total war expenditure. After repatriation, 5,000 German POWs applied to immigrate to the United States. All had been held in American camps. All cited the same reason. They'd seen what abundance without cruelty looked like. Friedrich Seidl was not among them. He stayed in Germany, rebuilt his life, taught mathematics until retirement in 1978. He died in 1991, shortly after German reunification. His daughter Greta, going through his papers, found the hidden log from Camp Concordia. 40 pages of dense handwriting, calorie calculations, meal descriptions, statistical analyses. On the final page, written in English, a single sentence. We didn't lose because they were stronger. We lost because they didn't need to be cruel. And we couldn't afford to be kind. Camp Concordia closed in 1946. The buildings were dismantled or repurposed. The POW barracks became storage facilities. The mess hall was sold to a local farmer, converted to a machine shed. In 2003, a historical society marker was placed on the site. The text reads, Camp Concordia, 1943-1946. German and Italian POWs held here under Geneva Convention provisions, known for humane treatment and agricultural work programs. Humane treatment, agricultural work programs. No mention of the 3 meals, the dropped breakfast, the coffee thrown away because it wasn't hot enough. But those moments, ordinary, undramatic, barely worth recording, did more to win the peace than any battle. Because they taught a simple lesson. Power isn't just the capacity for destruction, it's the ability to sustain abundance. To waste a little, to replace what's broken without cruelty. It's the ability to feed your enemies better than they ever fed themselves, and treat this as unremarkable. That's the power that ended the war, and that's the power that made the peace. The mess hall is gone now. Just Kansas wheat fields, stretching to a horizon so flat you can see the curvature of the earth. But somewhere in those fields, molecules remain from meals eaten 80 years ago. Carbon from scrambled eggs, nitrogen from roasted beef, phosphorus from milk and bread, scattered now, recycled by soil bacteria, taken up by wheat roots, becoming part of the land. The abundance remains, transformed, invisible, but permanent.